I need you to look at what is happening in eastern Syria right now. What you're seeing on your screen is a US Army convoy on the M4 highway near Deir ez-Zor, or rather, what's left of it. At 3:12 a.m. local time, a logistical convoy belonging to the 1st Battalion, 8th Infantry Regiment was ambushed in a coordinated complex attack. The initial reports we are receiving are catastrophic. According to a US defense official speaking on condition of anonymity, at least 12 American service members have been killed. Another 8 are wounded, some critically. This is not a minor skirmish. This is the single deadliest attack on US forces in the Middle East since the 2021 Abbey Gate bombing in Kabul. Let me repeat that: 12 Americans dead in one night in one ambush. The attack unfolded in 3 phases. First, an improvised explosive device, a large buried IED, detonated beneath the lead MATV armored vehicle. According to open-source intelligence analysts monitoring radio traffic, that blast was immediately followed by small arms fire from multiple positions. Then, as the conv halted and troops began to dismount, a second device detonated 50 meters to the rear, trapping the vehicles in a kill zone. We are tracking reports that the attackers used thermal optics and night vision, that they knew exactly where to hit, and that they melted back into the desert before any quick reaction force could arrive. But here is the question that is keeping Pentagon officials awake right now. Who did this? Initial claims of responsibility are flooding social media. ISIS is claiming credit. Iranian-backed militias are claiming credit. Even factions we've never heard of are rushing to attach their names to American blood. And in the White House at 3:47 a.m. Eastern Time, a president who has spent his entire political career promising to end wars is waking up to the reality that a new one may have just found him. My name is Host Name, and this is a special emergency broadcast from In History of Ours. What we are tracking right now is not just an attack, it is a test of whether the United States can still project power in the Middle East, a test of whether Donald Trump's doctrine of deterrence through strength actually works. And at this moment, the early indicators are not good. Let's go back to the ambush site. The M4 highway near Deir ez-Zor is a known hotspot. It runs through terrain that has changed hands multiple times over the past decade. Syrian regime forces, Russian Wagner Group mercenaries, Iranian-backed militias, Kurdish SDF fighters, and remnant ISIS cells all operate within a 50-mile radius. According to a former CENTCOM intelligence officer we consulted, the US military refers to this area as the swamp. And tonight, the swamp swallowed an American convoy. At 3:12 a.m. local time, the convoy was conducting a routine resupply mission from the Konoko Mission Support Site to a smaller outpost near the Iraqi border. The route had been cleared earlier that day. Aerial surveillance from MQ-9 Reaper drones had shown no anomalous activity, and yet the attackers were waiting. According to a source inside the Syrian Democratic Forces who shared intelligence with our team, the IEDs used in the attack were not crude devices. They were shaped charges, designed to penetrate armored vehicles, and they were buried deep enough to avoid detection by route-clearing teams. This is not the work of amateurs. This is the signature of a professional military force, or a proxy group equipped and trained by one. At 3:27 a.m. the first distress call went out. Radio chatter we've obtained reveals chaos in the immediate aftermath. Quote, "Ghost Main, this is Ghost 6. We are taking effective fire. Multiple casualties. I say again, multiple casualties. We need Kazovac immediately." End quote. The quick reaction force from the Konoko base arrived at 3:51 a.m., nearly 40 minutes after the initial blast. By then, the attackers were gone. They left behind nothing but spent shell casings, blood trails from their own wounded, and 12 American bodies. Now let me stop here because this is critical to understand. At 4:15 a.m. local time, a little over an hour after the attack, a Telegram channel associated with the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria published a claim of responsibility. They called it, quote, "a vengeance operation for the prisoners of the Crusader Coalition," end quote. But within 30 minutes that claim was contested. A second channel, linked to an Iranian-backed militia called Katib Hezbollah, also claimed credit. And according to signals intelligence we are monitoring, the radio frequencies used by the attackers to coordinate their withdrawal correspond to frequencies known to be used by the IRGC's Quds Force. The Pentagon is not commenting, but a defense official told us, and I quote, "We are still working to attribute the attack. It is too early to say who is responsible. Too early, but the clock is ticking, and in Washington the pressure is mounting." At 5:47 a.m. Eastern Time, just over 2 hours after the attack, President Donald Trump did something that surprised no one and terrified everyone. He tweeted, or rather he posted on Truth Social. The message was 3 words: "They will pay." No context, no attribution, no coordination with the Pentagon, with CENTCOM, with the State Department. Just a promise of vengeance from a commander-in-chief who has spent 4 years promising to keep America out of wars, and who now finds himself facing the prospect prospect of starting one. Let me walk you through what has happened in the 90 minutes since that post went live. At 6:12 a.m. Eastern Time, the White House press office scrambled to clarify the president's remarks. A spokesperson issued a statement saying, quote, "The president was expressing his outrage at the attack on our service members. He has full confidence in the military to determine the appropriate response." End quote. But the damage was already done. Within minutes of Trump's post, Iranian state media seized on the words, "They will pay," as proof of American aggression. Press TV ran a ticker reading, "Trump threatens Iran as US faces humiliation in Syria." At 6:34 a.m., the Pentagon issued its own, more measured statement. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth appeared briefly before cameras, reading from a prepared script. Quote, "We are evaluating all available intelligence. Any response will be deliberate, proportional, and designed to protect American forces." End quote. Proportional. That word is important. Because what the Pentagon considers proportional and what Donald Trump considers proportional may be two very different things. Now let's look at the region. At 7:03 a.m. local time in Baghdad, the Iraqi government announced it was closing its airspace to all military traffic pending an investigation into the attack. According to a source inside the Iraqi Prime Minister's office, this decision was made in panic, a desperate attempt to prevent Iraqi territory from becoming a battleground between the US and Iran. But closing airspace doesn't stop drones, it doesn't stop rockets, and it doesn't stop the thousands of Iranian-backed militiamen already operating inside Iraq. At 7:22 a.m., we began tracking movement at Iranian military installations. Satellite imagery from the past hour shows increased activity at IRGC bases in western Iran, particularly around Kermanshah and Hamadan, which house ballistic missile units and drone launch facilities. According to open-source intelligence analysts, these bases have raised their alert status to the highest level. Missile transporters are on the move, launch crews are at their posts. This is not the posture of a nation that expects de-escalation. This is the posture of a nation preparing for a strike. And then there's the oil market. At 8:01 a.m. Eastern Time, as New York trading opened, Brent crude shot up nearly 8% in 10 minutes. Traders are pricing in the very real possibility of a broader conflict that could disrupt supply routes through the Strait of Hormuz. According to a senior energy analyst we spoke with, if the US strikes Iranian targets inside Iran, Tehran has made clear it will respond by targeting Gulf oil infrastructure. We could be looking at $150 a barrel by the end of the week. But perhaps the most alarming development comes from Israel. At 8:15 a.m. local time in Tel Aviv, the Israeli Defense Forces announced they were cancelling all leave for combat units and reinforcing air defense batteries in the north. According to an IDF spokesman, these are precautionary measures. But we are tracking reports that Israeli intelligence has detected unusual movements by Hezbollah forces in southern Lebanon, forces that could be activated by Iran in the event of a US strike. A two-front war, American forces in Syria and Iraq, Israeli forces on the Lebanese border, Iranian missiles ready to launch. This is not a cascade anymore. This is an avalanche. Let me stop here because this is critical to understand. The attack that killed 12 Americans was tragic, but the response to that attack could be catastrophic. And right now, the man making the decisions is the same man who, just hours ago, posted 3 words on social media without consulting his own generals. At 8:47 a.m. Eastern Time, we received our first official statement from Tehran. It came not from the Foreign Ministry, but from the IRGC's official news channel. The message was brief and defiant. Quote, "The Islamic Republic of Iran had no role in the attack on American forces in Syria. Any US aggression against Iranian interests will be met with a decisive and crushing response." End quote. Decisive, crushing. These are the words of a regime that has spent 40 years preparing for a direct confrontation with the United States. But here's the problem. Multiple intelligence sources are telling us that while the IRGC may not have ordered this specific attack, the group that carried it out, whether ISIS or an Iranian proxy, almost certainly used weapons and tactics provided by Iran. According to a CENTCOM official, the shaped charges used in the IEDs are identical to those found in previous IRGC-supplied weapons caches in Iraq and Syria. So even if Tehran didn't pull the trigger, their fingerprints are all over the bullet casings. At 9:12 a.m., President Trump convened an emergency meeting of the National Security Council in the Situation Room. According to a source inside the room, the meeting was contentious. Military leaders, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, reportedly urged caution, arguing that a rushed response could trigger a wider war. But the president, according to our source, was fixated on optics. Quote, he kept asking, "What does it look like if I do nothing? What does it look like if I let them kill our boys and walk away?" End quote. At 9:34 a.m., the Pentagon announced that 2 additional squadrons of F-15E Strike Eagles were being deployed to Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. These are not defensive assets. These are strike aircraft capable of penetrating deep into Iranian territory. The message from the Pentagon is clear. We are preparing options, but options are not decisions. And while the military prepares, the clock continues to tick. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, reactions are pouring in. Senator Lindsey Graham, a close Trump ally, released a statement calling for, quote, an overwhelming response that makes clear America will not tolerate attacks on its service members, end quote. But other voices are more cautious. Senator Chris Murphy tweeted, 12 Americans are dead. We need to know who killed them before we decide how to respond. War is not a game. The divide in Washington mirrors the divide in the Situation Room. Strike hard and fast, or wait and verify. At 10:03 a.m., we received word from our sources in Moscow. The Kremlin has issued a statement urging all parties to exercise restraint and offering to mediate. But Russian mediation in Syria is a joke. Moscow has its own interests, primarily propping up the Assad regime and keeping Iran in its corner. Any mediation attempt will be designed to benefit Russia, not to de-escalate. And then at 10:17 a.m., a new development. According to a defense official, US intelligence has detected the movement of Iranian ballistic missile batteries to elevated launch positions inside Iraq. These are not defensive, these are offensive. If confirmed, this means Iran is preparing to strike US bases preemptively before America can strike them. The window for a measured response is closing, and we are watching it slam shut in real time. This is not just an attack, this is a fundamental test of American credibility, of Iranian resolve, and of whether the post-2020 rules of engagement in the Middle East still apply. Let's bring in our senior geopolitical analyst, General Mark Harrison, RET, former CENTCOM deputy commander, who's joining us via secure line. General, what are you seeing? Thanks. What we're witnessing is the most dangerous moment in US-Iranian relations since the Soleimani assassination in 2020. Back then, Iran retaliated with ballistic missile strikes on Al-Assad airbase, strikes that were telegraphed in advance to avoid American casualties. This time is different. This time, Americans are already dead, and the president is under immense political pressure to respond in a way that is visible, violent, and immediate. I'm looking at 3 scenarios for the next 24 to 48 hours. Scenario A, and I'd put this at about 55% probability, is a limited US strike on Iranian proxy targets in Syria and Iraq. Weapons caches, command nodes, maybe a senior IRGC commander if we can locate one. Iran responds with a similar strike on US bases, and we settle into a cycle of tit-for-tat escalation that doesn't trigger full-scale war, but keeps the region on edge for months. Scenario B, about 35% probability, is a major escalation. The US strikes inside Iran, perhaps a Revolutionary Guard facility or a missile production site. Iran retaliates with ballistic missiles against US bases in the region, potentially killing more Americans. At that point, the president has no choice but to escalate further. We could be looking at a sustained air campaign against Iranian targets, which would effectively be a war. Scenario C, the low probability option at 10%, is de-escalation. That would require Iran to publicly distance itself from the attack, perhaps even cooperate in identifying and targeting the actual perpetrators. But given the celebratory tone out of Tehran and the IRGC's statements, I don't see that happening. The regime sees this as a moment of strength, not weakness. General Harrison, thank you. So we are staring down the barrel of a conflict that could draw in the entire Middle East, with 12 American deaths as the opening act. And the decision of whether to go to war rests with a president who has spent his entire political career promising to end wars, not start them. What happens in the next hour will determine the future of the Middle East, and quite possibly, the future of the Trump presidency. As of this moment, at 11:47 a.m. Eastern Time, 12 American families are waking up to the news that their sons and daughters will never come home. The bodies of those service members are being prepared for dignified transfer at Dover Air Force Base. And in the Situation Room, the president is weighing options that could send dozens more, or hundreds more, to join them. The Strait of Hormuz is on alert. Oil prices are spiking. Military forces across the region are at their highest state of readiness since the 2020 escalation. And in Tehran, in Baghdad, in Damascus, and in Washington, leaders are making decisions that will echo for generations. We are going to stay on this story around the clock. In the next hour, we expect a formal address from the president. We expect statements from world leaders. And we expect to learn whether the United States is about to go to war with Iran. If you are just joining us, here is what you need to know. At 3:12 a.m. local time in Syria, 12 American soldiers were killed in a complex ambush near Deir ez-Zor. ISIS and Iranian-backed militias have both claimed responsibility. President Trump has promised retaliation. Iran has warned of a crushing response, and the entire region is bracing for what comes next. I need you to hit that like button, subscribe to In History of Ours, and turn on notifications, because this story is developing in real time, and you do not want to miss a single second. We will be back with updates the moment we have them. Until then, stay safe, stay informed. And remember, the men and women who died today were someone's parents, someone's children, someone's everything. They deserve better than a war started in haste and rage. But right now, haste and rage are driving the train, and the brakes are not working.